quotes. I've had some previous quotes on my properties. Paul had one on his. What we saw, the spread between that sort of market rate and the rates that our members got through the group buy was somewhere between a 20 and 30% savings. So we roughly what we think is about $67,000 off of the market rate. We worked out about $5,000 per person. So I'm part of that first group buy. I was ecstatic to see that kind of result. I actually wasn't expecting it to be that big of a spread. And when talking to the three companies that are involved in the group buy and that are going to be putting up these projects, I sort of asked, okay, well, why were you able and willing to sort of, have a discount that deep? And they said the cost savings that they received, because we've got all the technical information, we put it all together in a nice package. It was essentially pretty easy for them to quote on all of these projects. They didn't have to necessarily send somebody out to each property. They didn't have to spend a whole lot of time gathering all the information. It was all nicely laid out. Well, that investment time that they would normally have to spend, they could just devote that into lowering the price. And also it was for the opportunity to have a nice big batch of work all in one shot. So, last fall, things are starting to slow down after the busy season. That's a pretty nice carrot that we're dangling out in front of them. So they were all happy to be part of this program. We want a win-win situation, a win for our members that get to have an excellent deal on going solar, and a win for the companies because they get to grow their operations and hopefully get some economies of scale and have even lower prices the next time around. So I'm also proud to announce that here in the month of March, we've now sort of quasi-launched the second group buy. I'm still finalizing a couple of revisions to the technical package and to the eventual RFP that'll come out of that. So I know I've been promising to a couple of you about when that technical package is going to be re-released. It'll be fairly soon, probably within the next week. There's a few more changes I want to, just to help make things streamlined, in terms of how people get pictures and where they upload them and the file naming system and a whole bunch of little things like that. But we're already up to a list. You looked at it last fall, but I think we're almost up to 20 people.
I think it was 20 people.
Yeah, so we're already at 20 people again that are interested in this next group buy. So for those of you that aren't aware how the group buy works, essentially what we do is we have interested individuals. They become members of the co-op, and then they get a technical package. Once they gather all the information for that technical package, we bundle it up into an RFP, request for proposal, that we then submit to the market. We've got a list of every company that's installed a project through SAS Power in Saskatchewan, and we basically just emailed that list and a couple of other companies as well, ones that we're connected with in Manitoba and Alberta, and they bid on the project. This year there's a slight change. We're implementing a $50 refundable application fee. So essentially, in addition to your $100 membership that you've already paid for and got because you're here tonight, there's a $50 application fee. If your project goes ahead, we actually reimburse you that $50. If you don't go ahead with your project, then that just becomes a small fee that we use to operate for photocopying expenses and things like that for managing the program. So my goal is to have the group buy RFP closed by about April 15th. We'll see how, if we're still getting a bunch of applications in, we can possibly extend that. And then to release the RFP before the end of the month of April. Probably give the companies about a 3 to 4 week period to review the bids and submit their quotes. And so that'll take us to the end of May. And then we'll have our selection and award committee review those proposals and then ultimately award a single participant that whole project. What happens then is that winning company then goes actually out and does physical surveys of those properties and aligns their new proposal with what they submitted on the bid. We've got guidelines in there as to how far they can sort of deviate. Sometimes there's things like extra sub panels that are required based on the your main power panel in your house. Sometimes they maybe misestimated the cable run. If you're doing a ground mount system, maybe they thought they could go to this side of the house, and turns out there's other cables in the way and they got to do a longer run. So there are some small changes that can happen from the original quote that we receive to what your final quote will be. But the nice part about the way this group buy system works is once they've done that final edit, they submit to you a final proposal of what that project's going to cost. you then have the decision to make at that point. So even though you're going through this whole process, you're really not committed. You're invested, the $50 and that's it. So if you decide then that either the project's too expensive or things have changed, we had one participant, they had a windstorm and the roof was damaged, so they kind of had to push the project aside, and they're going to revisit it in a couple of years. So those kind of things can happen. So this is the nice flexible part, is you can decide then and there when you have your final quote whether you'd like to proceed. And just so you all know that we do have a 5% referral fee built into the price that you receive. So the price that you get is the final price that you're paying. What the companies have done is they've built in a 5% fee into that they then pay back to the co-op. We use that for our operating capital. And so the savings that we talked about even already included that 5% fee. So you're still seeing 20 to 30% savings, including the fee that we're getting back as a rebate. So I think it's still a very competitive offer for those of you that are interested in going solar. So, yeah. Any questions? I'm sure there's lots. So,
is there anything special in terms of roof? Like we had our shingles in place, I think 2 or 3 years ago.
Well, that's good.
Are normal shingles?
Yeah, no, actually, normal asphalt shingles are probably one of the easier systems to install. Josh's roof that you saw in his little garage with lean-to on the side, that was just straight asphalt shingles. So they have special plates that they drill through into the rafters to secure it, and it's a waterproof system. So the technology behind that is all industry standards. They've installed all across Canada and North America. We leave the specification of those types of components up to the company. We sort of specify tier 1 panels, maybe some specifications about the types of inverters, making sure that they're environmentally friendly so that they don't have cadmium and lead and stuff like that in them. But other than that, we leave the technical application to the professional installers so that they make sure they install it so your roof's not leaking and things like that. So typical asphalt shingled roof, a 412 pitch or whatever it happens to be, perfect for installation.
Is there any load issues with, they're usually 2x4 on 2-foot center? Right?
Yeah, and so that's a great question. I mean, for example, on the Connexus project, we did run into some structural load issues. You have to calculate wind uplift. So each of these companies does an engineering report to make sure that it meets the National Building Code for wind uplift in our region. So we have different, based on how windy it gets in Saskatchewan. So we're classed, I think, slightly higher than some other places. And so there's an engineering report that's done as part of their bid. And that's all included in the price that you receive. So it doesn't cost you extra. We require the companies to do that as part of their bid submission.
Would it have to be house by house, or would it be possible for a neighbor to tap in?
So Sask Power currently does not have virtual net metering. Saskatoon Light and Power, they've got that program with the car share program where they've created a sort of a one-off case. But here right now, your property can only be, your solar panels can only be tied to your single meter. So you can't share it with your neighbor as of right now. But we're trying to push that forward.
Can my house be my property and my detached garage be my neighbor's?
No, because there's property line issues. You can only install property on your own.
Unless you share the same power feed,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
can.
It's to the meter, 1 meter.
Yeah, so your panels have to be installed on your physical property,
Extension.
tied to your meter. No, so. But eventually through virtual net metering, that may be something that's possible. So we're trying to encourage SAS Power to look at those kinds of things. Another dream of mine is to have a large installation, say in a field, so for people that live in condos or apartment buildings where they pay for their own power, they can install a whole bunch of panels in a field somewhere and take the virtual credits for those and apply it to their power bill. Ultimately, that's one of the things I'd like to see SAS Power take on. They're not there yet, but hopefully through part of our advocacy as a group, we'd like to see that someday. So you can install them on your neighbors if he's willing to host them, and you could get the power and maybe pay him a rental fee for his roof or something. Yeah. Back there?
Another question. So my wife was asking about the panels themselves, and she seen or heard something about that it's not necessarily that environmentally friendly, the production of them. Does the co-op scrutinize that?
Yeah, so there's an environmental standard out of Europe, and I can't quote the exact EN36 number, whatever, but there is an environmental standard from Europe that SES followed, and then we also now incorporate into what we've got in our RFPs for both the large scale and ours. So we are cognizant of that, because there's some things like cadmium and lead that end up in some of the panels that are produced, and that environmental rating for it, it's just, you know, it's like any sort of other environmental rating. There's an agency in Europe that looks at these, that rates all the panels as they're produced around the world, and gives it sort of a pass-fail on that. We make sure that the installers are quoting to a panel that's that environmental rating. So,
Andrew, I just want to mention, we have 27 people on the list.
27, sorry, yeah, that list is growing daily. I just got another 2 before I came here today, so. So this is gonna be a nice big group buy, so that's good to see. Any other questions, or, oh,
Are you going to hope to have a split, like 3 different firms? that-
no, this time around, it'll most likely go to a single company. The companies are sort of happy to do that, to sort of get their foot in the door. But in this case, it'll be awarded to us. The goal is to have it awarded to a single participant. If there's some technical reason based on the receiving of the bids of why that might not be the case, we would maybe review that, but the goal is to have it to go to a single participant. And that assurance for the companies gives them the biggest reward, so hopefully they're reducing the prices the most. So.
If it goes to a single company, doesn't that extend the amount of time before you get your panels on your roof?
No, so one of the things we look at is the company's capacity to be able to do these installs. You know, so maybe if we're starting to get into the 30 and 50 and bigger numbers, but all of the companies that we're currently bidding to, you know, some of them have 3 and 4 crews, and you know, a lot of these projects take a day, maybe 2 days to install. So, you know, even at that rate, if they, you know, awarded them 30 projects, you know, you're still only talking a couple of months, you know, three months or so to get all of them installed. If that was just us. You know, some of these companies have, you know, big multinational supporters. I know, you know, Skyfire, for example, is one company. You know, they got, you know, they do thousands of installations across the country and things like that. So, you know, would that potentially eliminate some of the smaller providers? Potentially, but a lot of those smaller companies are also raring to crew up as well, right? So, you know, even the smaller installation companies that are here in Saskatchewan, I know they've got postings for new crews and things like that, so they can accommodate, you know, something along this size. You know, if we start getting into group buys that are, you know, 50 plus, you know, that may be something we have to consider about sort of limiting the numbers for each group buy. But at this point in time, we're not quite there yet. So.
Where's the resource for some technical questions? Like I think my most suitable route might be, you know, east-west facing, for example. So there's gonna be a penalty there to get the same amount of power, I'm gonna need more panels. So how will I build it? How can I figure that stuff out?
So part of the thing is that you don't necessarily at this stage need to figure that out. When you get, if you participate through the group buy, when you get your final proposal, there's a in sort of investment summary that'll say how much power you're producing based on your slope of roof. They'll usually look these things up on Google Maps, and you're going to submit a drawing as part of that technical package, is what roof orientation that you have. So the companies build their economic model for your specific project, and they spit out that data. So basically, tell them the property you want to put it on, and they're going to try to maximize the power that they can produce based off your property. Sometimes they may come back with a recommendation, hey, you've got too much trees and too much shading, maybe it's not even worthwhile, or it shows that your payback period is now 15 or 17 years as opposed to sort of 9, which is what we're kind of 9 to 10, which is what we're seeing. So then that becomes an economic decision that you could make sort of at the end of the process when you've got something concrete in front of you as to whether or not it makes sense.
They would recommend which routes?
They would recommend which roof. I mean, for example, on my particular property, because I use so much power, I've ended up getting west-facing, east-facing, and south-facing on 2 different levels.
Right.
And so you're right, the ones that are east and west produce less power, but it's not as much as you would think. I mean, there's, you know, if you go online, there's stats as to how much power, how much less power they produce, but you know, even if you only had a nice east-facing or only a west-facing, the economics of it are still such that, you know, it's probably going to be worthwhile. So you just might not be as good as somebody who had a nice big gable roof, south-facing, with no obstructions. But essentially, you get to make the economic decision once you get that proposal in your hand.
What happens if, after you got your solar panels installed, your neighbor puts up a 3-story building?
So, well, I would first of all call the city, because that's probably a violation of some of the city bylaws, depending on what neighborhood you're in. And that's one of the things that you need to consider before you make an investment into a project of that size is, what are the zoning restrictions for your particular property based on whichever city? Because we've got people that are, Assiniboia, Weyburn, Lumsden. So that's something you need to consider. Maybe if you're next to a bungalow and it's got a fire and then it gets raised, technically they can build a 2-story house on that property. That's something that you should consider before making that investment. Chances are they probably can't build a 3-story, from what I know about city bylaws, but it's all property specific. So, that also doesn't prevent them from planting a tree either. So, thankfully I've got a 2-story house. My neighbors to the side of me, they'd have to plant a monstrous tree before it even come close to affecting me, and even then it wouldn't bother. But you have to look at your property.
Sorry, we're just gonna have to
Okay.
keep going, so maybe.
One quick question?
Are you considering, other communities near Regina, but outside of Regina?
Oh yeah, no, we've already got our first install. I had one in Weyburn, we did one in Lumsden.
Okay.
We've got people interested in the Assiniboia.
Okay.
Basically, we're the only ones right now that do group buys in the province, because SES Solar Co-op doesn't do them in Saskatoon. So if there's anybody up in Saskatoon that wants to go solar on their own property, tell them to give us a call. So, thanks. Oh, so you want to move to pass it?
Yeah, so move to pass Andrew's report. John Brazil, seconder, Brian Brunskill. And all in favor? Done, okay. So,